Hello and welcome to DSR. I'm David Rothkopf, your host, and this is the second of two episodes we're doing to focus on the developments in the past few days with regard to a ceasefire in the Gaza war and what that may mean for the region as a whole. Yesterday, as you may recall, we did a podcast with Steve Cook of the Council on Foreign Relations and Alon Pincus, an Israeli diplomat. And today we're joined by two other excellent experts who are also friends, who you will know well from our podcast. One, Kim Ghattas, journalist, author, and regional savant. How are you doing today, Kim?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. It's the first hopeful day in a long time, and I hope it lasts.
Indeed. And also our friend Shibley Telhami, professor at University of Maryland, author. How are you doing today, Shibley?
Personally fine. Personally fine.
Personally fine. That sounds quite guarded.
Yeah, it's guarded because I am less optimistic than Kim, although
Well, I didn't say I was optimistic. I was just kind of relieved for the day, and then we'll see tomorrow what happens.
Yeah,
I'm
this
very
is
guarded as well, cautiously optimistic, but I want to hope.
what comes from living in Beirut. But I will. You may not be surprised, but yesterday when we talked about this, both Steve and Alon and I all made essentially the same point, which is this is a 20-point plan. What has been agreed to is one or two of the points, and the remaining 18 points are really, really hard. And in fact, some of them are beyond hard. Some of them look like they may be impossible if we continue with the same players that are currently sitting around the table right now. I don't want to put words in your mouth, though. The first place I'd like to start is with your kind of brief take on what has happened and where we are. And let me start with you, Kim.
David, it's great to be with you, and it's really great to be with Shibley as well. Listen, first, I want to emphasize the human aspect of this. Just for today, to see the relief of the families of the hostages. Hopefully, they will be reunited with their loved ones, indeed, within the next 72 hours, or I would assume that means by Monday. Gazans making their way home. It's just, I mean, it's a two-edged sword, right? Because the momentary relief and then the letdown if things don't proceed is also very difficult. But just for today, I think I would like to focus on the human aspect of this, because Israelis and especially families of the hostages and then 2 million Gazans have been living through a nightmare, an absolute endless nightmare over the last 2 years. But as you said, this is a 20-point plan, and we've been at this first point many times before, not just in January with President Trump, but previously also during the Biden administration with these stage releases that were supposed to be the first step towards more releases, and then a longer term ceasefire and a cessation of hostilities and talks, etc. And every time it faltered. Um, President Trump is a complicated president, to say the least. And if you look at his policies in the US, it's deeply concerning and disconcerting. But if we separate things just a little bit, I do think that he has done something that no American president has done before, which is really practically grab Netanyahu by the collar, sit him down in the White House, in the Oval Office, and make him do that phone call to the Qataris, for example. And I think the strike that Israel conducted against Qatar was a turning point where President Trump suddenly thought, you know what, all these business deals I wanted to make in the Middle East, it really could go down the drain. So the players in the Middle East, Netanyahu, Hamas, Mahmoud Abbas, are still all the same. President Trump, earlier this year was ecstatic about the deal that he'd reached, and envoy Stephen Witkoff, fantastic, amazing, and then they didn't follow through. Right? It was the first step, and then they thought, okay, this is all just gonna go off on its own. That's not how it works. You have to follow through with the players, and I think that's really going to be the test. If President Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize next year, he better grab all the players by the lapel at every step of that 20-point plan.
Well, Shibley, he's not known for grabbing people by the lapel, but I'm not going to get into the details where he does grab them. He's certainly a complicated character. But somehow, even people who are extremely critical of President Trump have to acknowledge that he's got some kind of conversation going on in the Middle East that's different from other people, that he's got some kind of affinity with some of the leaders that's different from other people, that the transactional quality that a lot of Americans find troubling and may even see as corrupt, has worked for him to some degree. And I'm just wondering, do you think that suggests getting beyond this point? And, Elon Pincus made this point yesterday when he said, this is essentially the Biden plan. I told Elon this probably means he'll never be allowed back in the United States. But the point was, as Kim said, these points have been around a long time. And the question is whether there is the will to use these relationships to get to the next 18 points.
Yeah, the short answer to that is I'm not optimistic about that, even though I agree. And I actually wrote an article with a colleague of mine. We talked about it last time in Foreign Affairs, saying that it takes a mercurial president like Trump, who's not beholden to the bureaucracies and so forth, that sort of revolutionary in some ways, to do it. Yes, in theory, for sure. But there are many reasons to think that this is unlikely, and I can come back to that. But I want to first say, I am so happy we're here. Let me just say that, so it's clear. Obviously, this is a moment where, yes, end of fighting, end of horror in Gaza, release of hopefully the hostages in full, a release of some Palestinian prisoners. Remember, there are probably about 11,000 Palestinians who are held prisoners, and maybe 6,000 have been taken just from Gaza. Maybe more than 15,000 have been arrested in the West Bank during this period. 3,500 of the people arrested have not actually been charged. Over 400 are children. We are getting some released, obviously, but a very small portion of what will continue. I'm happy for the hostage families. These were taken. Their taking was a war crime. They've suffered. The families have suffered. And of course, I'm especially happy for the people of Gaza who have, gone through hell. Literally hell. And I think that as the guns fall silent and we start paying more attention to what's happening and what is happening in Gaza, and wake up to the reality that Gaza, as we have known it, has been obliterated, doesn't even exist, that more than 10%, possibly much higher, of its population has, been killed or wounded, that 90% have been displaced. The structures have been devastated. 95% of the schools have been damaged. And then you just to deal with the immensity of the reality of the next day. Even after you feed people, you give people water, who's going to manage this? Where's the money going to come from? How long is it going to take? Even besides talking about the politics of it, what government, for what end, what path. And And I think that that reality is angering, not because we've all been angry. I know the two of you and many like us around the world and in America, as polls show, have been devastating. But we have witnessed, I mean, we have witnessed the killing of a child every single hour for 2 consecutive years. And it happened on not only on Biden's clock, which it did, but it happened for over 8 months on Trump's clock. And I don't say just happened on his clock. It happened with his enablement. If you think that this gives you hope for alleviation of pain and tragedy or doing something right, just think about this, that he has had no trouble enabling this for over 8 months. And if you look at the statement that he has announced and posted on social media announcing the agreement, it's basically being sold as a war-ending hostage deal. There is not even a word of empathy in that paragraph that was so hopeful for the rest of the world about what the victims on the ground. So that doesn't give me much hope in terms of what's driving the man. Maybe you're right. There is something bigger. I don't think the idea of getting a peace prize, a Nobel Peace Prize, is in and of itself sufficient for him, because he thinks that he already deserves it anyway. Maybe he'll get more. He thinks he solved the Pakistani-India conflict. Obviously he's taking credit for 7 already. He's already taking credit for this one, no matter what. And so he's looking for symbols. He's not looking for facts. He's looking for something he can claim, not for changing realities on the ground. And that troubles me a lot because I don't even know who's making these decisions. We don't have to go far. We don't have to know that he doesn't really fully grasp what's happening on the ground in the Middle East, or whether it's or the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, which he said, I think, Albania-Azerbaijan conflict, or I can't remember what reference he made to it.
Yeah.
And look at what's happening in our reality at home. Look at what's happening. If you're going to find hope in him learning and doing the right thing in the Middle East, think about what's happening on our soil, in our cities, to our people. And so the idea that you can actually build hope on that, to me, is terrifying. In all honesty, it's terrifying. But the bottom line is, it's not just the 20 points, whatever these are. I think just the very idea that you would have some kind of a foreign Western-based entity that doesn't include locals to run Gaza afterwards in the 21st century, after the huge history of the Middle East, of state system coming into being with casual conversations around a dinner table by imperial powers, led by a former prime minister of Britain, of all people,
who cheered on the Iraq War. Yes,
exactly, and who, to my knowledge, has never apologized for it, or never thought it was wrong.
he has
to this
actually.
day.
Well,
He has?
not
Okay.
apologized, but he sort of expressed regret that it was a bad idea,
But
which is different from
regardless,
apologizing.
so I don't see it. But the bottom line is that, honestly, it comes down to this thing about doing the right thing, particularly in terms of having a path to Palestinian independence or some kind of freedom, having an equitable outcome for Palestinians, without which, obviously, nothing is going to happen. The donors are not going to give the billions because they're going to be burned tomorrow if they have an unstable situation and you spending tens of billions of dollars to rebuild, and then suddenly the conflict flares up again. So I'm very worried, and I think that the world is so hungry for this to end that they're grasping at this as an opportunity. And we're not looking at the fact that there are no details, there are no
No,
real agreements. Yeah.
Shibley, we are. Everybody understands that the details of this deal are deeply problematic, but that's what's available today. And people in this region and in Gaza and in Lebanon are desperate for the killing to just stop. Even if the
Yeah.
deal is not perfect, we need the killing to stop. We've had enough. I mean, I sit in Beirut where, we had a 2 months long war last year, and there was a ceasefire. And since the ceasefire, every day Israel strikes Lebanon. It doesn't make the news, but every day, almost every day, Israel strikes Lebanon and people get killed. And Israel says they're Hezbollah operatives. Israel doesn't need to show the receipts, right? So they can, conduct strikes and say it was this or it was that. And I mean, maybe they're right and maybe they're not. There were some children killed a couple of weeks ago. So we are all very aware in this region that this deal is far from perfect, that Israel will continue to conduct strikes because it will say, well, actually, there was, a Hamas guy on a moped, or we saw some weapons, or whatever. But we need to stop the killing. And there are so many problems with this plan, from whether the Trump administration is going to have the wherewithal to follow up, whether Steve Witkoff is going to get distracted by Ukraine and fly off again, whether Jared Kushner is just in it for some, business real estate deal. I mean, at least, I have to say it's an improvement from the Gaza Riviera, from the Trump Riviera, or whatever that was supposed to be.
But I
And
have
I'm
to
not
tell
sure
you,
that it,
I'm not sure that it is. I don't know. There is no indication that that is not part of Trump's plan.
well, the Gaza Riviera involved getting everybody out with no guarantee that they could return. It did not really talk about any details about aid or reconstruction. It did not talk about anything that even remotely mentioned a path towards a Palestinian state. I don't have the 20-point deal right now, but there is wording in these 20 points that have some kind of very vague vision. And, we may be 50 years away from it. And I take your point, Shibley. This is far from perfect. And at every turn, it is also our responsibility in this region to push the President Trump, and his team to implement something that is actually a little bit more equitable towards the Palestinians and the region. Because this is a one-sided deal, right? This is a deal that favors Israel. Let's not make any mistake about that. And it also ignores what's happening in the West Bank, where settlers are on a rampage and people are being kicked out of their villages and olive groves, on a daily basis. So the totality of the issue at hand is not being addressed, but you need to start somewhere. My other concern about this deal is that I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu is able to step back from his war persona. And if President Trump has somehow managed to get him into a box when it comes to Gaza, and he says, listen, this has to stop now, right? We've done point one, now we need point two, I want point three, and he's just going to hammer at it. And Arab countries, I think the difference also with the Riviera plan is that Arab countries were, taken aback by it and shocked by it, with maybe one or two exceptions. They were deeply dismayed by it. They were not part of the discussion. They are part of the discussion for this one. They sat with President Trump. Okay, he changed the wording of the plan once he sat down with Netanyahu again. But the Arabs feel like they have some ability now to shape some of this, and it's never going to be perfect. But again, we have to start somewhere. But my concern is that between now and election day in Israel, whenever that is next year, Netanyahu just is not able to step back from his war persona. And that might mean that the odds of another strike on Iran have just gone up.
Yeah, I think, of course, I agree with you, Kim, about take it for now. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, what else you can do? You got to stop this. I mean, just for the sake of suffering, getting even just humanitarian aid in, and no question that is welcome. As I said, that's a good news day. Just looking ahead, obviously, is part of the problem. And when I'm looking at it in terms of the reality for Trump, the sort of things that impact him and affect him. Now, I'm not, I think this is really seen mostly as a hostage deal. Trump is taking credit for releasing all the hostages. So is Netanyahu.
Yeah,
Israeli
and maybe
government
and a
going
real
into the
estate
meeting.
deal. I don't think he has any
Yeah,
empathy
no,
for
I
anyone.
understand. But what I'm talking about in terms of what I worry about that is that the deal, of course, has not yet been fully implemented, the phase one, obviously, because there has to be the release, and you have the full release, and the hostages are out, and prisoners are exchanged. And then, of course, that has been the biggest domestic pressure on Netanyahu is the hostages. I mean, that's why we've seen these incredible pictures of Israelis day in and day out going into the
I don't
streets.
think Netanyahu
That's
cares,
going to be
actually.
that. Well, I do. I think that he does, actually. I think it affected him. I think it affected the mood in Israeli politics. I think it also affected the way he's seen externally. So regardless, that's not going to be an issue, a strategic issue. And I think that I don't believe for a minute that this Israeli government, the way it's constituted, has given up on the idea of controlling Gaza or
I
on
agree.
ethnic cleansing. And so, therefore, you're going to be playing this game, and therefore, Trump is going to have to be on the ball day in and day out. This is Netanyahu's 24 hours a day preoccupation. This is a side issue besides golf for our president. And I think that sort of doesn't. But I do think there are two strategic dynamics that are important for the president. Number one is a domestic one. And he is beginning to worry about it in ways that we have not seen, that the Israel issue has become a big divide issue, not just for the American public, but for Republicans. Increasingly, the rise in young Republicans who are really angry with Israel and angry with the support the U.S. gives to Israel and angry with the fear that Israel wants to draw the U.S. into more war in the Middle East, especially Iran, that this is not over. That's going to bear on because it's coming from some of his allies, some of his base, some of his core. But the second one is the one that David alluded to early. I think there is some big picture related to the attack on Qatar that is huge. And maybe, in fact, it's still unfolding. I'm not even sure the president really gets it, except for the personal part of it. But I think it's a bigger picture. And let me tell you what it is. The first, of course, is the obvious, which is why are these Gulf states spending tens of billions of dollars on U.S. military equipment and having bases in the U.S. and if they can't defend themselves against an attack like the one that took place, and the U.S. doesn't help them stop it, and they don't have the weapon to stop it. Supposedly, they're investing in all these high-tech weapons, and they could not stop it, and the U.S. didn't help them stop it. Now, that has really shifted the thinking, I think, in not just in Qatar, but Saudi Arabia also has to think, and Egypt, by the way, and Egypt. And I think that happens to take place at a time when China is suddenly exercising its strategic cards. So far, it's been more of a trade and political weight state without exercising that. But suddenly, it's showing its military muscle in ways we have not seen, particularly its equipment. And the Iran-Pakistan scrimmage in the air certainly plays into this aura of Chinese weapons and Chinese influence, to the point that if you are an Arab country that has used to think that the shortest path to Washington went through Tel Aviv, that is, the closer you are to Israel, the better you're off in securing American support. What happens when Israel itself becomes a direct threat to your agenda in the region? America will always take Israel's side.
I want to pick
And
up on that.
and
If may I,
and yeah, sure.
I'd like to interject on that. You guys have been great guests, by the way, because I haven't had to say anything. Usually, I'm like, I have to ask questions, but you're just having a great conversation. But I want to pick up on it and take us to a slightly different point, which you're leading to here, because we've talked about the deal, and I think I'll be honest with you. I'm just going to insert parenthetically an opinion that strikes me listening to you and the other experts I've listened to. I think everybody's overstating what this is. This is not a deal. This is a hostage deal. It's a temporary ceasefire. We have seen hostage deals and temporary ceasefires in the past. They break down. As long as Netanyahu is Netanyahu, Netanyahu's supporters are Netanyahu's supporters, Netanyahu's doing what he's doing in the West Bank, Trump has no concern for the future of the Palestinians. This is going to break down. It is not, it is not going to produce what you want. But, as you were talking about it, but as you're both talking about it from a broader regional perspective, today is an interesting day, right? Secretary of Defense Hegseth announces a Qatari air facility in Idaho. And I think the
The
attack on
Saudis must be thrilled.
well, in some ways they probably are because they think they're going to get the same thing.
So, yeah.
But I think that clearly a turning point here was the Israeli attack on Qatar. The Qatari relationship with Witkoff is super close. The Qatari relationship with the Trump family is super close, and obviously there's a giant U.S. military presence there as well. But Trump put pressure on Israel because pressure was being put on him by Qatar. This is not the way things used to work in the past. In the course of the past few years, but both in terms of Netanyahu destroying Iranian proxies, but also in terms of Trump coming in and things that preceded it, the strategic layout of the Middle East has changed. Israel is no longer, sort of primus inter pares, in the sense that the majority in the Democratic Party do not support what they're doing in Gaza. A majority of American Jews don't support what they're doing in Gaza. The contempt for Netanyahu is sky high. And I had a conversation with somebody who you both know, who's a very, very prominent U.S. commentator. And I said, who's America's most important ally in the region? And he unhesitatingly said, the Gulf states. It's not Israel anymore. Something has changed in the dynamic in this region. The U.S. is, under Biden and other people who didn't want to get involved, pushing more independent responsibility onto those states to handle regional issues. The U.S. is not reflexively going to be pro-Israel, and I think what has happened in Gaza is producing a generational change. I don't think in the future the U.S. will ever look at Israel the way that it did in the past. And so I'd be interested, first Kim, then Shibley, what's your sense of the change? Do you accept the idea that the strategic lay of the land in the Middle East has changed dramatically? And I would add
Yes.
into it Shibley's other point, which is China's a player. China wasn't a player now, but China is a serious player in this region. So Israel stock down, the U.S. withdrawing a little bit, the U.S. shifting closer to the Gulf states, Iran stock down, China's stock up. That's a lot of moving parts. So, Kim?
Two things happened over the last few years, couple of years, 2, 3 years. And I would posit that it started with President Trump in his first term, putting out the order to assassinate Qasem Soleimani, the Quds Force chief, in January 2020. For me, that was, looking back in hindsight, I think that was a crucial moment where Israel and the US realized that they could put Iran, on the back foot, and that they could. I'm not, condoning, assassinations. I'm just analyzing what happened. I mean, Qasem Soleimani was essential to Iran's regional strategy, and we can see now in hindsight that his removal played a role in Iran and Hezbollah's mistakes, the mistakes they made over the last couple of years in managing the aftermath of October 7th. But what happened, therefore, over the last 2-3 years is two simultaneous things. One is Iran's regional axis started unraveling and was then heavily damaged over the last 2 years by Israeli attacks in Lebanon, on Hamas, on Iran itself with the 12-day war. It started with, volley of missiles in the spring of 2024, and then culminated into the 12-day war in the summer of this year. And so Iran's axis, which it built very carefully and methodically over the last 4 decades, and in which one of the underestimated and under sort of recognized pillars was the joint venture with the Assad regime in Syria. I mean, that is such a crucial pillar of that joint venture and of Iran's ability to build what it built over the last 4 decades. I think we forget about that often because it's an underexplored aspect of Iran's rise, and I'm slightly obsessed with it because it's a big part of my next book, from the 80s until today. And so Iran losing Bashar al-Assad, at the end of 2024, I think is really, I don't want to say a coup de grace, but it's quite damaging. And I don't think they recover from that because they've lost the geographical continuity and contiguity. They don't really have access to Hezbollah in Lebanon anymore. And that requires a whole different rethinking of how they operate their regional policy out of Tehran. So that's one aspect of how the region has changed in quite fundamental ways that have been with us for the last 4 decades. The other thing is Israel's rise as a military hegemon, to the extent that Gulf countries today are asking themselves, is Israel the new Iran? Is this what we need to fear more than Iran? Iran is on the back foot. Their proxy militias are decimated, decapitated, on the back foot. Assad is gone. The Yemenis, the Houthis can still, launch a missile here and there, but it isn't what it used to be. And instead, Israel is, where Iran used to boast that it controlled 4 capitals, Baghdad, Beirut, Damascus, and Sana'a. Now the Israelis are not quite boasting, but they're showing that they can strike, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, take a buffer zone in Syria. So they're in an expansionist mood. They're on the offensive all the time, whereas their army is called the Israeli Defense Forces, right? I mean, we can discuss, semantics here, and that also changes the mood in the Gulf about, normalization deals or peace deals or Abraham Accords, Abraham 2.0, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that therefore then changes the mood in Washington, particularly when you have a president like Trump, who, although he absolutely, Shibley, I agree with you, empowered Netanyahu almost by omission over the last 8 months, and by not caring, but also by winking and telling him go ahead with the Iran strikes, etc. Trump, he's still, fundamentally, I think, somewhere a real estate agent, and this is what he's looking at, a real estate deal, and all this war just doesn't work for him. And I just find it so striking. This, Ayatollah Khomeini used to say, war until victory. And sometimes you listen to Netanyahu and you think, my God, I'm not comparing the two, but it's the same kind of, war until victory. But what define victory? And he hasn't been able to define it. So I think these changes are fundamental over the last 2-3 years in the region.
Well, to put it just directly, David, in response to sort of your question, the core issue is the American-Israeli relationship. Let's be real, because without American enablement, there's no way the Israeli far right would have stayed on an expansionist policy that the rest of the world rejects and goes against international resolutions and international laws, including the horror that inflicted in Gaza. There's no way that could happen without the enablement and empowerment of the United States. The question is whether that is now shaken. That is really bottom line. And so, yes, up to a point, as I said, domestically it's shaken. I think there is a profound change. I don't think that what's happening to the young people in America is something that is going to go away even if this war ends. And it's not, I think, in many ways. But even if it does, I think we have what I call the Gaza generation in America for a lot of reasons, in the same way we had a Vietnam generation and a Pearl Harbor generation. This is the Gaza generation. And yes, it's going to be politically consequential for both parties, one way or the other, for sure. But the second thing is that the Israeli-U.S. strategic relationship is itself, I think, going through a redefinition, and partly because of some of the things that Kim talked about, which is kind of the arrogance that the far right in Israel is showing, that has become threatening even to its allies, even countries like Egypt and Jordan, and countries that had been in the past friendly, Turkey. They feel that the expansionism, in addition, by the way, to obviously the fact that their public opinions are upset with them for the relationship with Israel and the U.S. That's always been the case. But aside from that, they're actually feeling strategically threatened in some way. And that's where the Qatar picture comes in at a time, as I said, when in fact, for Trump particularly, as a transactional president, and separate from China, the Gulf states give, and they give a lot, and they give generously, both personally and to the country, and Israel takes, and mostly takes. And this transactional scheme doesn't quite work for him had it not been for the fact that he doesn't really care much about the Palestinians, that his propensity is pro-Israel to start with, that his domestic politics and his base were pro-Israel to start with. And now that's shifting. So yes, there are some ingredients here that make things, fluid, let's say, in ways that they had not been. But that they will land in the right spot for Trump to do the right thing is a leap of faith I'm not prepared to make.
I think that's the right analysis. A year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, I would go around and say, why are we reflexively reverting to a U.S.-Israel relationship that made sense during the Cold War when there is no Cold War, or that made sense during the War on Terror when there is no War on Terror? Their success with Iranian proxies has removed one more reason that they were strategically important to the United States. And at the same time, their government has become odious to the point that whereas a couple of years ago when I would say this stuff, people would go, how can you say that? This is a matter of faith within the United States government, and you can't even say it publicly. And now the majority of Democrats believe this, the majority.
Well, Bibi Netanyahu will tell you that there's still Iran to deal with and Israel. I'm not agreeing, but I'm saying he will say Iran we're still at the front, on the front line of the fight against Iran and the mullahs and their nuclear
Well,
program.
no, and he will say that. And by the way, Barry Weiss at CBS News, owned by the Ellison family, will say it. There are people who will say it. I just think Bibi Netanyahu picked a side, and it was the wrong side. And it has now become a niche political issue, and it's, it's a matter of faith among the right, but it's not necessarily among the center or the left. Anyway, what I think we can agree is people are overstating the significance or likely long-term consequences of this deal, and people are understating or underappreciating the degree to which the strategic lay of the land in the Middle East has changed. And it's very, very important that the United States get these calculations right, beyond the views of any one political leader. That's going to take a while. And as both of you know well, the United States has a long history in the Middle East of getting things wrong. In fact, we either get things wrong or we get things badly wrong. We tend, the getting right is unusual. So we will keep on this, and that will obviously give us the pleasure of turning to you regularly. For now, we are so grateful that you took time today to talk about this. And we wish everybody a good weekend. A reminder to people who are listening to the DSR network that Monday is a federal holiday. And so we will not be putting out our daily podcasts and so forth on Monday. And then if you want to support what we're doing, go to the dsrnetwork.com, click on membership. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, as an increasing number of people are, hit like, hit subscribe, help support what we're doing. It's the fastest growing part of what we're doing, and we are so grateful for it. Anyway, until then, thank you, Kim. Thank you, Shibley. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Great
Good
to
to
be
see
with
you.
you.